Hey everybody, Antony here, and I know I was going to be on hiatus for about a month due to the various preparations I was having for my school play and the various travelings I was going to have from the 4th of July until the 8th of August, which is still going to happen, mind you. But this was an opportunity I could not afford to miss. And I'm sure that if you see the title below this video, then you know what I'm talking about. This is my review of Britten's Billy Budd, which was shown at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. And let me tell you, this was absolutely fantastic, and more on that later. The conductor was Moritz Gnann. The production was by David Alden. The set designer was Paul Steinberg. The costumes were by Constance Hoffmann. The lights were handled by Andy Cutbush. The chorus master was William Spaulding. The children's chorus master was Christian Lindhorst. The choreography was done by Maxine Braham, and the dramaturgy was by Angelika Majdowski. Now, I've never really watched or even heard Billy Budd until this year, and the only Britten opera that I've watched was when I was 15 years old, and it was with my dad at the English National Opera, and this was Death in Venice. But after doing a lot of research on this opera for many years, I have definitely felt that this opera was really well loved by a lot of critics and fans alike, and there are a lot of reasons, but I can think of two. First of all, this is pretty much the brother opera of Puccini's Suor Angelica. Why I say brother opera is because while Puccini's Suor Angelica is an all-female cast consisting of sopranos, mezzo-sopranos, and contraltos, with the villainess being the contralto role of the princess, who is Sister Angelica's aunt, Billy Budd is an all-male cast consisting of tenors, baritones, bass baritones, and bassos, with the role of John Claggart being the main villain of the opera, usually performed by a basso profondo. So that's one reason why I say that Billy Budd is a brother opera to Puccini's Suor Angelica. Secondly, this opera is very demanding to three principal characters, namely the title character Billy Budd, Captain Vere, and John Claggart. Now, Billy Budd has to be sung by a lyric baritone who usually specializes in Mozart and a lot of these young, very flexible, very physical, and very impulsive male roles in opera. You know the ones like Guglielmo from Così fan tutte, Papageno from Magic Flute, Count Almaviva from Marriage of Figaro, Mazzetto, and even the title role of Don Giovanni from, Don Giovanni, Posa from Don Carlo, Marcello and Schaunard from Gianni Schicchi, and many others that I can name off the top of my head. Not only does the baritone who usually sings Billy Budd has to have a fine voice, but he also has to be very athletic because this role is definitely a physical challenge for a lot of lyric baritones, and there have been a lot of great Billy Budds in the past, like Theodore Upman, who created the role, Simon Keenleside, Thomas Hampson, Bo Skovhus, and many others. This is a calling card for any great lyric baritone. Now, Captain Vere, complete name Edward Fairfax Vere, calls for a full lyric spinto or even a dramatic tenor who has to have great acting chops and also a very great voice as well to match with his acting abilities. Now, this is a role that doesn't really require a lot of beautiful singing, but it has to have a very solid technique, especially when it comes to those very powerful lines consisting of high A's, B flats, and a few B's here and there. This is quite a killer, not only vocally, but psychologically as well, because this is a character that is psychologically tortured because of his conscience. He tries to do the right thing, but apparently he has to give in to what the law of the world has to tell him, and he has to really keep that law. Unfortunately, this type of law that he tries to uphold makes himself realize that he's killed one person that is so valuable to him, and that's Billy Budd, because, well, there comes a chain reaction. Billy Budd has killed John Claggart because he himself was accused. So then comes Captain Veer simply killing Billy Budd because he realizes that, oh yes, Billy Budd has broken the law of the war, the law of war, excuse me, the law of war. And yeah, basically speaking, this role requires a tenor with not only a very great and very powerful voice, but also great acting chops, especially in the moments where Veer is so ridden by guilt and ridden by his own conscience. This is definitely a very interesting role on such a psychological level that a lot of tenors, whether they be lyric, spinto, or dramatic, or even held in tenor, have definitely tried. Even certain tenors who usually specialize in the character tenor repertoire usually find themselves singing this very complex and very interesting role. Now, John Claggart requires a basso profondo with very great, very sonorous low notes and some pretty good high notes as well, such as his high Fs and high F sharps. So basically, this role is totally on par with the likes of Philip II from Don Carlo, Hagen from Götterdämmerung, to some extent Klingsor from Parsifal, Gunnemans also from Parsifal, and a lot of the Italian ed basso roles, and even some of the Wagnerian basso roles. This requires a basso with a lot of great stamina and has to really exude evil from every pore. But he's not always the type of character who's like comic book evil, but he's also the type of evil that we also have to kind of recognize at times because, well, he's not the type of villain who goes like, "Wow, I'm gonna rule the world." And sure, he does sing of making Billy Budd's life miserable as hell, but let's just say that TV tropes simply puts him as a candidate for faux yay. Because, well, as much as he hates Billy Budd for his outstandingly energetic nature and how much he means well to a lot of the shipmates and everybody on board the Indomitable, he really tries his hardest to try to make Billy Budd's life a living hell. So this is definitely one of the most evil basso roles in all of opera history, and that's how I feel about all three of these principal players. They're quite challenging, not only vocally, but also on a very psychological level. And that's why it's very exciting for a lot of great singers to interpret these roles. Not to mention the minor roles do have something to offer as well on such a great level. But it's the three main principal players that are the bread and butter of this opera. Hence, a lot of players or singers have sung these roles with such great success. Now, enough of my praising of this opera, even though this is the first and only time that I've seen this opera, which is this year, and this is also the last showing. Let's get on with the review. So, what did I think of the production? I thought it was actually pretty good. It was able to carry this dark and very dreary world that Billy Budd has been well known for. And sure, I would have wanted a little bit more color. Like, I would have wanted to see a lot more dark blue or turquoise or more bluish colors all around. All I got to see were like black colors, orange through the walls, and mostly white. And I would have wanted to see more burgundy, especially when entering the captain's room. Because I thought, with just all white, it just seemed so, well, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I would have wanted to see more color, basically speaking. But I will say this, the lighting was handled very beautifully. Not to mention the choreography was done very well, especially in the final scene in which some of Billy's closest companions try to comfort him, but they end up in like one wall to another. So I thought that was very well done choreographically. So yeah, everything was well done. Sure, the production may be, well, it may vary on your own mileage, but it was actually pretty good all around. When I saw the trailer of this production of Billy Budd, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I was kind of, initially put off by this production because of how lifeless I perceived it to be. But after I saw this live on stage, all I have to say that this production of Billy Budd pleasantly surprised me. Sure, it's not the best production that I've seen, nor was it the worst. But I have to say that it was actually pretty good all around. And the lighting, the effects, and the choreography definitely helped this production shine beautifully all throughout. Now, the singers are definitely the part that I'm very excited to talk about, especially considering that the Billy Budd for this evening was none other than one of my very good friends, John Chest, who I saw as Papageno, Marullo, and Morales from Carmen, from Magic Flute, Rigoletto, and Carmen, respectively. Excuse me if I stammered. Yeah, this is the tragic flaw of Billy Budd. He stammers, especially when facing dire situations. But I have to say, this opera handles it very well. Anyways, going to the singers. What do I think of John Chest as Billy Budd? I was absolutely amazed by his performance. He looked the part. He sounded the part. He was Billy Budd. He had the build, he had the voice, and he had the stage presence, just like all the previous Billy Budds of the past. Theodore Upman, Simon Keenleside, Bo Skolfus, you name it, he definitely is totally on par with them. If not, simply better. Because he had that type of youthful, very ardent, very passionate, and very thrilling presence, and quite impulsive presence, I may add as well. He simply put a ferocity in Billy Budd that made me root for him until the very end. And it was actually quite sad to see Billy Budd die a tragic death. I thought his performance as Billy Budd was very heart-wrenching. It absolutely grabbed me by the heartstrings. And that is just how powerful of a performance John Chest gave. And all I have to say is kudos to you, Mr. Chest. You did one hell of a job portraying this character to a T. And then we come to the pivotal role of Captain Veer. Of course, Billy Budd may be the main character of this opera, but it's Captain Veer that moves the story around. And here, Captain Veer was sung by character tenor Burkhard Ulrich. Now, Burkhard Ulrich is not really the type of tenor I would usually associate with these type of roles. When I think of a singer singing Captain Veer, I would usually think of any singer who has sung the roles of Eleazar from La Juive, Idomeneo from, Idomeneo, to some extent Belmonte from Die Entführung aus dem Serail, or even that of Alfredo, the Duke from Rigoletto, all of those, well, main man tenor roles that many people usually associate with Captain Veer. I would usually expect a heftier sounding voice with a lot of ring on his top notes. And sure, at times, Burkhard Ulrich, he does at times sound a little bit unsteady in his singing, but he manages to get better and better throughout the course of the evening. And sure, he did crack on one scene, but he pretty much put that aside, and I thought he was able to give such a harrowing performance as Captain Veer. I thought he did a fantastic job all throughout, though his voice wasn't really my ideal Captain Veer voice. Now we get to John Claggart, the big bad of this opera, sung by sung by Basso Nobile Gideon Sachs. Now, Gideon Sachs is very well known for his portrayals of Nick Shadow from Rake's Progress, and many of the Wagnerian basso roles, including that of Hunding, Hagen, King Henry from Lohengrin, and a lot of the Verdi basso or bass baritone roles, and a lot of bass baritone roles that he usually sings in his repertoire for about 20 or 30 something, 20 years, basically, give or take. Here, I thought he was absolutely, astonishingly frightening as John Claggart. I was absolutely on the edge of my seat every single moment he was on stage. The top of my hairs were almost standing on end. They were totally standing on end. It was just a very thrilling and powerful performance that Mr. Sachs gave as the big bad of Billy Budd. His voice was also very well managed all throughout. It was a very even and very, well, virile and masculine instrument. Not to mention his various glares through the audience, especially to Bud, and even to Squeak. Poor Squeak was just so intimidating. The other roles were handled very well all throughout. Markus Bruck, Albert Pesendorfer, and Tobias Kehler sang the roles of Mr. Redburn, Mr. Flint, and Lieutenant Radcliffe. I thought their voices matched very beautifully. They were able to keep this virile, masculine, round, rich, low-voiced male roles, and they were able to sing it very beautifully. Their techniques, their chemistry on stage, and everything else in between worked very effectively. There was no sore thumb. There was nobody that stuck out like a sore thumb. All three gentlemen sang very well, especially considering their artistry. Now, that is definitely something to look forward to. Every single day, I would really love to see them. So yes, all in all, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Pesendorfer's, and Mr. Kayla's performances as the three policemen, the three officers of Captain Veer, were absolutely fantastic and at times harrowing. And then we get to Jörg Schörner, Noel Bowley, and Linus Carson as Billy Budd's greatest companions, Red Whiskers, Donald, and Dansker. Now, Jörg Schörner as Red Whiskers, by the way, I saw Jörg Schörner singing the roles of one of the priests from Magic Flute and Duncaia from Carmen. I thought was absolutely fantastic in terms of voice. This is definitely a fantastic role for any character tenor, even though he doesn't really have a lot of screen time. And boy, did he pull it off very, very well. Noel Bully, and I'm sure you're watching this, Noel, because I'm going to give my honest critique about your performance in this character. And all I have to say is bravo. Sure, he did not really have a lot of screen time as well, save for the parts of the chorus and especially some of the opening scenes, and especially his scenes with Bud and the rest of the shipmates. But all you have to say is, despite his role being quite minute, he was able to give a very powerful and very, very energetic performance in the role of Donald. And then we have Dansker, sung by Linus Carson, who is a veteran American baritone who specialized in a lot of the roles in the dramatic baritone repertoire, namely Giorgio Germont, Rigoletto, many others that I can name off on the top of my head. Oh, and also Mandrika. He sang at the Met during the 70s and the 90s and has now been a member of the Deutsche Oper Berlin and many other European and American opera houses. And all I have to say is that his presence and voice were absolutely very appropriate for a character like Dansker. Now, Dansker is a very old yet very wise man who is pretty much a mentor to Billy Budd, especially telling Billy Budd to watch out for Jemmy Eyes or John Claggart, as well, Jemmy Eyes is the nickname given by our dear friend Dansker. And here I thought his voice was very appropriate for the role of Dansker. So yes, it's absolutely no surprise that nowadays Linus Carson is specializing in the character baritone and character basso repertoire nowadays. So here I thought he was absolutely in good form as Dansker, though his voice nowadays is a bit worn and torn, but he totally makes up for it in terms of stage presence and total pure commitment to the scenes that he is in. And now we move on to Poor Old Squeak, sung by another great friend of mine, Alvaro Zambrano. Here, I thought he was just absolutely fantastic, playing this character that, sure, he is on the villain side, but I feel sorry for him, especially given his fate. I mean, just wow. He was able to pull off Squeak's cowardice and submission to his master very effectively. Not to mention, his voice was ringingly beautiful all throughout. He had such a solid technique and had a very sweet, dulcet like voice that he was able to maintain all throughout this opera, especially given his role that is quite minute, but is still quite thankful in terms of his wonderful voice. And then we have The Voice of the Sailor, sung by Matthew Newland, another good friend of mine. His voice was absolutely fantastic. It was in tip-top form, and even though he had an offstage role, all I have to say is his voice was in great shape, and he was able to keep the drama going, especially with those commanding tones all throughout. And then we have The Novice, sung by Thomas Blondel. I actually saw him as Macduff from Macbeth, which I didn't really care for. Well, his performance as Macduff, though I have to say that he was a very great and very solid musician all throughout, though his voice for Macduff wasn't really my most ideal voice ever. It's very safe to say that this is actually one of his better performances vocally, because this is definitely a role that actually suits his vocal needs and it also suits his Fach as well, given the fact that he is a lyric tenor specializing in Mozart, some of the Baroque repertoire, and some bel canto. Here, I thought his presence was absolutely harrowing. I mean, when he gets called out for, well, not doing his job properly, he gets flogged. And oh my god, when he came out on stage after being flogged, I was just so wow. Just words cannot really describe just how mortifying it was just watching him crawling and writhing in pain. It just really broke my heart. And I have to say that his voice was very endearing. And when he knows that he had to try to betray Billy Budd, I was absolutely feeling sorry for his character. Granted, there were moments in which he did go over the top with his facial expressions, and those were the only moments where I felt rather kind of unsure and rather, well, thinking to myself, was this how he was told by the director? Because it sure seemed forced. But all I have to say is he was able to maintain his lyrical instrument all throughout, and his acting was pretty solid all around. And then we have Marco Mimica as the very minute role of Mr. Boson. All I have to say is that he had a very solid technique, and as a character basso role, I was able to really, well, enjoy his performance, and he was able to pull it off very well, vocally and in terms of his presence. His presence on stage was absolutely quite strong and did have a sense of power all throughout. And it was a very, very energizing performance just to see him in such a minute role. And then we have The Friend of the Novice, sung by Stephen Barkey. He had a very solid voice, and even though his role was extremely minute, his voice and acting were very solid all around. And then we have the very minor roles of Arthur Jones and two of the roles of Arthur Jones and many other small roles in this opera sung by Heine Bolsmeyer and Tadeusz Milewski. All I have to say is they sung their roles very well, and they were able to contribute to the drama very well. And then we have the two first mates who were seen at the beginning of the opera, sung by Ben Wager and Simon Pauli. I thought their voices blended very well together, and their stage presence were just as strong as an ox. So yes, everybody did their parts very, very exceptionally all throughout, with the star being John Chess as Billy Budd. So yes, he definitely was in tip-top form, and his performance was one of the best I've ever seen so far. And the chorus, well, the men's chorus and the children's chorus were also sung extremely well. Outstanding, I might add. The conducting done by Maestro Moritz Gnan was absolutely solid, and needless to say, very fantastic all throughout. So overall, this was definitely fantastic. Sure, the production may vary in other people's opinions, but the singing was all throughout very, very wonderful. And this was definitely an evening that I am very thankful for watching. And this was definitely an opportunity that I did not want to miss. Well, that's all for now. For those of you who've seen this production of Billy Budd, you're very welcome to share your opinions as well by, well, you can leave a comment below, or you can even post a video response if you like. Until then, this is Antoni signing off and wishing you all a good night. And stay tuned tomorrow for my review of Donizetti's Maria Stuarda, which is also going to be on the Deutsche Oper Berlin. And I also managed to see Joyce DiDonato in passing. I said a little hi to her, but she was quite busy. And I'm actually very excited to see her performance as Maria Stuarda. So I am actually very excited for her performance in this role because I've actually heard a lot of great things from a lot of critics and a lot of fans about her performance in the title role of one of Donizetti's tragic queens. So, Joyce, if you're watching this, I'll see you tomorrow, and I'm very excited to see you live on stage for the very first time. And without any further ado, I wish you all a good night.